Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of AEW's Revolution. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Ricky Starks versus Chris Jericho with the JAS band from ringside. I thought this was a great match to start Revolution. Back and forth matchup between Starks and Jericho with Ricky and, Starks and Jericho both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Jericho then was keeping the pace of the match, but Starks hits a DDT on Jericho for a near fall. Jericho then gets up, hits a Death Valley driver on Starks for a near fall. Jericho then goes for a codebreaker on Starks, but Starks counters it with a devastating powerbomb. Jericho then hits a codebreaker on Starks for a near fall. Starks then gets up, hits a spear on Jericho for a near fall. Jericho then applies a Walls of Jericho on Starks, but Starks quickly breaks the hold. Guevara makes his way out to the ring, but he is attacked by Action Andretti. Jericho then hits Starks with a bat. Referee doesn't see it. But Ricky gets up, hits a Rochambeau on Chris Jericho, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Ricky Starks. Hats off to Ricky Starks for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a final burial match. It is Jungle Boy versus Christian Cage. I thought this was a great matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Jungle Boy and Cage, with Jungle Boy and Cage both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Jungle Boy was keeping the pace of the match, but Christian opens the casket, and the casket was filled with chairs. Christian takes the chairs out of the casket, but Jungle Boy hits a senton off the stage on Christian Cage. Christian then gets up, throws Jungle Boy into the casket. Cage then tries to close the casket lid, but Jungle Boy is fighting him off. Christian then hits a kill switch on Jungle Boy on the stage. Jungle Boy then gets up, applies a snare trap on Christian. Jungle Boy then hits Christian with a chair shot. Jungle Boy then finally throws Christian into the casket. Jungle Boy then closes the lid. And your winner of the match is Jungle Boy. Hats off to Jungle Boy for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the AEW Trios Championships. It is the Elite versus House of Black. I thought this was a great match as well. Back and forth matchup between the Elite and House of Black, with the House of Black keeping the pace of the match. Nick Jackson then hits a 450 off the top rope on Brody King. Omega then hits a V-trigger on Brody King as well. Omega and Malachi Black both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Omega hitting a Snapdragon suplex on Malachi Black. Omega then goes for a V-trigger but missed and hit Julia Hart. Malachi Black then hits a Fade to Black for a near fall. The Elite then hit a BTE trigger on Malachi Black in the middle of the ring, but the House of Black ultimately hit the Dante's Inferno, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match and new AEW Trios champions are the House of Black. Hats off to the House of Black for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the AEW Women's Championship. It is Saraya versus Jamie Hayter versus Ruby Soho. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Saraya, Hayter, and Soho, with Hayter keeping the pace of the match. Ruby Soho then hits a Hurricane Rana. Ruby and Jamie Hayter both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Hayter hitting a roll-up, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match, and still AEW Women's Champion, is Jamie Hayter. After the match, Toni Storm then attacks Jamie Hayter. Baker then attacks Saraya and Toni Storm. Ruby Soho then attacks Toni Storm and Saraya, as well as Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter. And it looks like Ruby Soho has joined forces with Toni Storm and Saraya. And it looks like, to me, this looks exactly like the old school NWO with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. But hats off to Jamie Hayter for getting the win in that matchup and retaining the AEW Women's Championship. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a Texas Death Match. It is Jon Moxley facing off against Adam Page. I thought this was a great match as well. Back and forth matchup between Moxley and Page, with Moxley and Page both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Page then attacks Moxley with barbed wire. Moxley then is now busted wide open. Moxley then pulls a fork out, ends up applying a triangle choke on Page using the fork. Now Page is busted wide open. Moxley then throws Page headfirst into a barbed wire chair that looked absolutely brutal. Page then gets up, hits a powerbomb on Moxley on the chair structure. Page then wraps himself in barbed wire, hits a moonsault to the outside on Moxley. Moxley then gets up, hits a cutter on Page. Moxley then hits a pile driver on Page using a chair. Page then gets up, hits a fallaway slam using barbed wire. Page then hits a dead eye on a barbed wire chair on Moxley. Moxley then throws Page over the top rope onto the barbed wire table to the outside. Moxley then hits a death rider on Page. Page then gets up, hits a buckshot lariat on Moxley. Page then hits a clothesline, sending Moxley over the rope with a chain that's wrapped around Moxley's neck. Moxley ends up tapping out, and your winner of the match is Adam Page. Hats off to Adam Page for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the TNT Championship. It is Wardlow versus Samoa Joe. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Wardlow and Samoa Joe, with Wardlow keeping the pace of the match. Wardlow then hits a whisper in the win off the top rope on Joe. Wardlow and Joe both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Wardlow hitting an F10 on Samoa Joe. Wardlow then hits a swanton off the top rope on Joe. And then Wardlow ultimately applies a submission hold on Samoa Joe. Joe taps out. And your winner of the match and new TNT champion is Wardlow. Hats off to Wardlow for getting the win in that matchup and becoming the new AEW's TNT champion. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the AEW Tag Team Championships. It is the Gun Club versus Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett versus the Acclaimed versus Orange Cassidy and Danhausen. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup with all teams involved, with Orange Cassidy and Danhausen keeping the pace of the match. Gun Club then hit a Shatter Machine on Danhausen, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match and still AEW Tag Team Champions are the Gun Club. After the match, FTR music hits. They make their way out down to the ring. They end up attacking Gun Club. And it looks like we're going to get an FTR versus the Gun Club match for the AEW Tag Team Championships relatively soon. But hats off to the Gun Club for getting the win in that match and retaining the AEW Tag Team Championships. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of AEW's Revolution. It is MJF defending the AEW World Heavyweight Championship against Bryan Danielson in an Iron Man match. Number one, MJF's entrance to this match was absolutely awesome. The match itself was a great match. Back and forth matchup between MJF and Danielson, with Danielson keeping the pace of the match. Danielson hits a running knee on MJF, pins for the 3. Danielson wins the first fall. MJF then hits a roll-up, pins for the 3. MJF then wins the second fall on Danielson. MJF then goes for the cover again, pins for the 3, and MJF then wins the third fall. Danielson then applies a figure 4 leg lock on MJF, but MJF breaks the hold. MJF then hits an elbow drop off the top rope through the timekeeper's table to the outside. Referee gets close to counting Danielson out, but MJF hits a tombstone on Bryan Danielson through the timekeeper's table. MJF then hits a head seeker on Danielson, pins for the 3. MJF then wins another fall. Danielson then gets up, hits a diving headbutt on MJF off the top rope. Danielson then hits a running knee. Danielson then applies a submission on MJF, and Danielson wins another fall. MJF then applies the Salt of the Earth on Danielson, but the hold is broken. Danielson then applies a label lock on MJF, but the hold is broken. MJF and Danielson both exchange again in the middle of the ring. MJF then hits a tombstone off the middle rope. Danielson then gets up, applies a submission on MJF, but the time runs out. And it looks like the match ends in a tie, 3-3. But Tony Schiavone goes to the ring, talks to the referee, says that Tony Khan says that this match must continue. The match goes on to sudden death. Danielson then hits a Poison Rana on MJF. Danielson then hits another running knee on MJF for a near fall. MJF then hits Danielson with the clothesline, and then MJF applies a label lock on Danielson. And your winner of the match and still AEW World Champion is MJF. Couple things I'm going to say, man, about AEW's Revolution before I get out of here, man. Number one, was this a solid show? Absolutely. I think this was a really good show for AEW. And I mentioned this in the last pay-per-view that they had, that AEW needs a hard reset, man. I think a lot of stuff that was going on, honestly, you know, the Elite and CM Punk and stuff like that, and all the backstage morale, I think AEW needed a hard reset. And I'm not saying that Revolution was that, but is it a step in the right direction? Yeah, I absolutely think it is a step in the right direction. With that being said, a couple of things that happened on Revolution that kind of, sparked my interest. Number one, Iron Man match was absolutely phenomenal. But it was the House of Black finally winning the Trios Championships, man. And I mentioned this multiple times in the past as well. This was well overdue for the House of Black. With Malachi Black and Buddy Matthews and Brody King, this was well overdue. And, to be honest with you, when the Trios Championships were announced, I said, these championships were built for the Elite. And I still believe that. I still believe that Tony Khan made the Trios Championships for the Elite. But, right now, I mean, for what it's worth, everybody kind of I feel like everybody in AEW kind of have their own little team. I mean, you got Death Triangle, you got the House of Black, obviously, you got the Elite, you got the Dark Order. Another team that I wouldn't be surprised, I think it would be pretty cool if they were to be a trios, is Penta teaming up with, obviously, Phoenix and Mark Briscoe. Now, obviously, everybody's still waiting to see what's going on with Pac because they're a part of the Death Triangle, but it would be a cool trios, team with the Lucha Bros and Mark Briscoe teaming up as a trio. I think it'd be absolutely awesome. But like I said, it was well overdue for House of Black. I'm glad they won the championships, but again, this is also a hard reset for the Elite. I think it's something where Kenny Omega needs to go on a singles run, and possibly chase the TNT Championship or the World Heavyweight Championship. And I think the Elite need to stick to the tag team division. Man, I think there's a lot of stuff still left undone for the Young Bucks, in the tag team division. And, at the end of the day, man, they can still be a trios. But I think, there's more storylines to be made if, the Bucks do their own thing in the tag team division and, Kenny Omega does his own thing as a singles competitor. Man, I think it'd be great for both parties, honestly, between the Bucks and Omega. And it would make for great, better matches, great storylines, and, it'd be awesome to see. With that being said, though, the build to this pay-per-view, too, was lacking, man. I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, they put a lot of investment, or some investment, I would say, into the MJF Bryan Danielson storyline leading up to Revolution, which, for what it's worth, I thought it was okay. Could it have been better? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the storyline between Bryan Danielson and MJF could have been a hell of a lot better than what it was. But the match itself between Danielson and MJF was absolutely awesome. The Iron Man match, 60 minutes, absolutely awesome match. But this pay-per-view lacked build, man. I mean, it's not just the Danielson and MJF match. I mean, it goes from the Trios Championships to, practically almost the whole card. I mean, you got Ricky Starks and Chris Jericho, which, yeah, that storyline was going on for a while. But I also feel like when it pertains to Jericho and Ricky Starks, the well has run dry, man. There's nothing else more Jericho can do to put over Ricky Starks. Now, with that being said, I think Ricky Starks, after beating Jericho at Revolution, should keep his momentum going into Double or Nothing, which was announced for Las Vegas. I believe it's May 28th or May 29th in Vegas for Double or Nothing, which is going to be an absolute phenomenal show, man. I'm very much looking forward to it. But with Ricky beating Jericho at Revolution, this builds up Ricky's momentum as a humongous babyface for the company. It's time for Ricky to kind of capitalize on that momentum. And who knows, man, maybe go after the TNT Championship. And I think, honestly, for what it's worth, if, AEW and Tony Khan and Ricky Starks end up going that route, I think the story writes itself because, you got Wardlow, who just beat Samoa Joe for the TNT Championship. Now, Will Hobbs just won the the Revolution, Face of the Revolution ladder match, which grants Will Hobbs an opportunity at the TNT Championship, which will happen this week on Dynamite. I think the story writes itself, man. I think the story is still left to be undone between Starks and Hobbs, and I think it'll be a great opportunity with the momentum that Ricky Starks has gained here lately, especially with the matches that he's had with Jericho, to possibly go up against Will Hobbs for the TNT Championship. Now, I know a lot of people are like, whoa, Wardlow's TNT Champion, but, I've mentioned this multiple times about Wardlow as well, man. Wardlow came out strong as ever in that storyline with MJF. It was a great storyline, and honestly, there was a lot of hype and momentum around Wardlow. 100%, man. The crowd loved Wardlow. He was a humongous babyface, especially in the storyline with MJF. And yeah, eventually he beat MJF. But after that, I'll never forget the fact that after he had that great storyline with MJF, Tony Khan ends up booking Wardlow against J.D. Drake. Like you had nothing else more for Wardlow at that time but J.D. Drake. With that being said, man, the TNT Championship, they have a tendency to hot potato that championship, man. It's, that championship, when it was created, really meant a lot to AEW, at least in my opinion. I mean, Brody Lee held that championship, Cody Rhodes, Scorpio Sky, Darby Allin. You know, that championship actually meant something. And honestly, for what it's worth, it was almost, if not more important than the AEW World Championship. But now, man, it lacks meaning. It lacks purpose almost, man, because that championship is so often tossed around from person to person that there's not a dominant champion for that TNT championship. Now, you know, with Wardlow defending that belt against Hobbs, you know, I personally, I think Hobbs will beat Wardlow. You know, and Wardlow may beat Hobbs, but I think, in my opinion, I think Hobbs is going to win that belt against Wardlow, and Wardlow's going to drop that title. And honestly, I don't think it's that bad of an idea, man. I think everything was set up for Hobbs to beat Wardlow for the TNT Championship, and if it pans out the way that I'm thinking, and if I'm, you know, being the booker or fantasy booker for AEW, you know, it'd be a perfect opportunity to book Ricky Starks to chase Will Hobbs and finish that storyline between Starks and Hobbs, and Starks finally goes over, you know, and beats Hobbs, but not only beats Hobbs, but wins the TNT Championship, and it'll be Ricky Starks' first ever championship in AEW. The story writes itself, and you can have this storyline leading up all the way until May for Double or Nothing. And I think it would be absolutely fantastic, man. I think, you know, hopefully, like I said, with Ricky Starks' momentum, hopefully, you know, Tony Khan and AEW continuously keep pushing Ricky Starks, and maybe, who knows, he might get a championship opportunity here in the near future in AEW. Jungle Boy and Christian Cage, man, this was a great match. I just wish there was more build towards this match. It was a very lackadaisical build. Now, credit, I know the storyline's been going on for a while between Christian Cage and Jungle Boy, but Christian Cage has been off the scene for a while, for a few months, to be honest with you. So, I mean, seeing him come back, yeah, it's awesome. But again, man, it's just the pure definition of lack of build, man. They really could have built this match up to be something really great. And it was a good match. Don't get me wrong. I think it was a really good matchup. It just needed more build, man. I was happy with the outcome of the match with Jungle Boy getting the victory over Cage. But I look forward to what's going to happen next with both Cage and Jungle Boy. Is Jungle Boy going to actually go after Championship Gold? Are we going to see him go after the World Heavyweight Championship or the TNT Championship? That's still yet to be seen. But Jungle Boy did say that he wants to wear a championship around his waist in 2023. So it's still yet to be seen, man. But I definitely look forward to what's going to happen next with Jungle Boy as well as Cage. You know, that'd be absolutely awesome to see. But all in all, it was a really good matchup between Jungle Boy and Cage in that final burial matchup. The Elite versus House of Black, I already touched base on this, man. It's great that the House of Black got the opportunity to face off against the Elite and become the new Trios champions. Saraya versus Jamie Hayter versus Ruby Soho. It was a good match for what it's worth. Again, it really did lack the storyline and the build towards this matchup. But I mentioned this, you know, earlier about this matchup, man. You know, a lot of people are kind of against what Saraya and Toni Storm are doing. And I'm not saying that I'm not 100% on board either. I mean, I think what's going on here is, you know, they brought in Saraya, which Saraya is a great talent. You know, I think she's a really good talent. But I think what Tony Khan and AEW are doing right now is this, you know, and I've mentioned this in the past as well. I think what Saraya and Toni Storm are doing is this, you know, outsiders, you know, female version of the NWO. I mean, you have, like, you know, Saraya and Toni Storm being the Kevin Nash and Scott Hall coming into AEW and trying to take over that women's locker room. And now that they have the addition, it looks like, of Ruby Soho, it's pretty much a rerun of the Outsiders, man. I mean, Ruby Soho, Saraya, and Toni Storm are all former WWE talent, and that now wrestle under the AEW banner. So I think what Tony Khan's doing, and in that aspect, you know, if that's what we're getting here, I think it's going to be pretty cool. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of speculation around what they're trying to do with this stable, possibly. There's been rumors from multiple people saying that, you know, because the Bellas were at Revolution's pay-per-view, and the Bellas want to come back and wrestle, that it's a good, you know, there's a good chance that the Bella Twins might come into AEW and maybe join forces with Saraya, Toni Storm, and Ruby Soho. I think that would be kind of insane as well. There's also been speculation about Mercedes Moné possibly coming over to AEW. A lot of things are up in the air right now, man. I mean, I think what they're doing, I think it's absolutely 100% in a way what Hall and Nash did as the outsiders in WCW. But I think what Tony Khan's doing it and how he's doing it is with the female roster. And I think it brings more light into the female roster. It gets people excited. It gets people talking, you know, wondering what Saraya and Toni Storm are going to do next. And now that they have the addition, for what it looks like, of Ruby Soho, I think everybody's going to be anticipating why Ruby, you know, wants to hear from Ruby Soho on why she ended up joining forces, what it looks like, with the likes of Saraya and Toni Storm, man. So I'm loving what they're doing. It definitely gets more eyeballs on the female roster for AEW, and it gets a lot of people talking about what's going to be next for Saraya, Toni Storm, and Ruby Soho. But all in all, it was a really good matchup between Saraya Hayter and Ruby Soho. Jon Moxley versus Adam Page, man. I touched base on this earlier. This was a fantastic matchup between Page and Moxley. Page's entrance music, by the way, and entrance alone was absolutely awesome. Looks like he's got some new entrance music. It's pretty cool. But it was a great match, man. But I think the storyline between Page and Moxley needs to end. And I think Moxley, I don't know what's next. I don't even know what's next for Page, man. But I mean, we can't keep getting Moxley versus Page. I think the Texas Death Match was the final nail in the coffin, if you will, or should be at least, between Page and Moxley. And I don't know. I think if anybody needs a hard reset, I think it's Moxley as well. Definitely is Adam Page. I think Adam Page needs a hard reset. And hopefully they can figure out what they're going to do with Adam Page, man, because I feel like right now they threw this Moxley-Page thing together because really at the end of the day, who else is next for Page and Jon Moxley at this point? I mean, the list is very slim at this point for both Moxley and Page on who they might face next, in my honest opinion. Wardlow, Samoa Joe, again, touched base on this earlier. It's great that Wardlow beat Samoa Joe for the TNT Championship, but I do believe that Wardlow will drop that belt this week against Will Hobbs on Dynamite, and Will Hobbs will be the new AEW's TNT champion. The tag team matchup for the AEW Tag Team Championships, the Gun Club versus Jay Lethal, Jeff Jarrett, versus the Acclaimed versus Orange Cassidy, Danhausen. It was a really good matchup. I wasn't really too happy about the outcome with the Guns walking out with the AEW Tag Team Championships. I personally believe that, the Acclaimed should have won. But I get why they won due to the fact that FTR came back, which is absolutely fantastic, man. FTR was definitely missed. One of the greatest tag teams of all time. And it looks like we will eventually get FTR going up against the Gun Club for those AEW Tag Team Championships, which is going to be absolutely awesome to see. And it's great, like I said, it's great to see him back, man. Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood should make for a great match between FTR and the Gun Club in the near future. And then obviously the main event, man. MJF, Bryan Danielson, AEW has a tendency to do these, post-media scrums, and you have MJF in the back with Tony Khan, telling everybody that he's the best wrestler in the world. Now, do I believe that? No, I don't believe MJF is the best wrestler in the world. But what I will say is that what MJF is doing right now as a whole is some of the best work I've ever seen from any wrestler in a long time. And what I mean by that is obviously he's not... I don't think MJF is the wrestler, the caliber of wrestler of what a Bryan Danielson is. I'm not going to put him in the same conversation with Bret Hart and, Kurt Hennig and Ric Flair. I'm not putting MJF in that category. I'm sorry. But what I will say, as far as being a heel and the promo skills that MJF has and the mic skills, you had to put him up there with some of the greatest of all time. You do, because at the end of the day, there's people out here that, you either love MJF or people out here desperately hate MJF with a passion. And people obviously still talk about what happened with what MJF did in the crowd by throwing that drink to somebody in the audience, and it's getting a lot of flack from AEW and MJF. But MJF lives the character, man. MJF lives the gimmick 110%. That's who MJF is. That is MJF. And he also brings, regardless of whether you hate it, you like him or you hate him, he brings a lot of eyeballs to the product. There's people that want to see MJF win, and there's a lot of people that want to see MJF lose that belt. Do I see MJF losing that championship? No. I think MJF's going to hold that belt leading up to 2024 when his contract's up. And at that point, we're going to decide on what, MJF is going to do, whether he's going to stay with AEW or go to WWE. If I had to be honest, for as far as MJF, I think his career is better suited in AEW. And that's not me being a super fan or anything else like that. But obviously the antics that MJF has done in AEW, I don't think it's really going to fly with what's going on with WWE right now. And that's to say if MJF actually gets a solid push in WWE. Now if this was Vince McMahon, I don't think MJF would get the push that he's looking for, to be honest with you. I think MJF would be on NXT. And they would try to do their best to push MJF on NXT and build his character and his craft and everything else like that. But I don't think that, it's not going to be a significant push of what Cody Rhodes got. I don't believe that at all. And with that being said, from what it looks like Vince McMahon is back in creative again, running, Monday Night Raw and possibly SmackDown. So, again, it's not really looking too bright for WWE right now with what's going on. But MJF is a household name for AEW. I truly believe that. I think MJF is going to stick around with AEW, and he should. Because the amount of opportunities that he's been given in AEW have been a lot. And really, him being with AEW has only elevated his name more than what it originally was before he got in AEW. And I truly believe that. Now, like I said, do I think he's going to lose that championship belt? Hell no. I don't see that happening at all. MJF's going to hold that belt going into 2024 when his contract is up. And then at that point, who knows, man? Sky's the limit for MJF. But all in all, Revolution was a really great show, man. It really was. I'm not going to sit here and say it was the greatest show of all time. But was it one of AEW's best pay-per-views that I've seen in a long time? Yeah, absolutely. From a bell-to-bell standpoint, it was very good matches on this card. And honestly, the pay-per-view format of how they had that show, it was a 5-hour show, I believe. It was a really good format. Tony Khan wasn't cramming everything into one pay-per-view where, you got 7 or 8 matches all night. It was insane, But this was a really good pay-per-view. And after the, Revolution, I look forward to what's going to happen on Dynamite and the direction that, Tony Khan and AEW are going to go. I know Tony Khan had mentioned that he has a lot of major announcements coming down the pike for AEW, and I look forward to that. I mean, AEW just announced that they're going to have this AEW All Access show after Dynamite, which is coming up soon to kind of give you a behind-the-scenes look at what's going on in AEW, with certain superstars and Tony Khan and what goes on behind the scenes. And I think it's the first time ever for all professional wrestling. So it's a big move by Tony Khan and AEW for what they're doing with this All Access show, especially. Everything that's goes down backstage, and sometimes the morale's not the best. And again, man, this could be something too where with all this stuff coming down the pike for Tony Khan, this might be enough, maybe too much for Tony Khan to really to understand. To be honest with you, I think it might be too much on Tony Khan. I mean, he's also running another company with Ring of Honor. They just got their TV deal, and they're working with the Ring of Honor app and Honor Club and everything else like that. They just did the TV tapings for Ring of Honor. But there's a lot on this guy's plate, man. I mean, for real. There's a lot on Tony Khan's plate, and it makes you wonder, how this guy's going to be able to handle all this stuff coming down the pike, to be honest with you. And it's crazy to see, man. But I definitely look forward to what's going to happen on Dynamite. Revolution was a fantastic show. And honestly, for what it's worth, man, despite the build, I think AEW has they do a great job with these pay-per-views, man. Because, like I said, despite the build, these matches were awesome. The Iron Man match was phenomenal. The Texas Death match was phenomenal. House of Black beating the Elite for the Trios Championship. Absolutely awesome. So, at the end of the day, man, long story short, Tony Khan and AEW, they usually 9 times out of 10, they usually don't have a tendency to disappoint their fans with pay-per-views. Usually their pay-per-views are always really good for the fans, and this Revolution did not disappoint at all. But this is my review of AEW's Revolution. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.